GitHub Actions, tips, tricks, and more with Jessica Deen. Huzzah! Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. We are here live with somebody. Actually, you know what, Damien? You met Jessica at GitHub Universe. Why don't I shut up and you do your thing?
Yeah. So I had the pleasure of being introduced to Jessica from the GitHub developer advocacy team at GitHub Universe, and I begged her to please come on the show and talk about something awesome. She had so many awesome things. It actually took us a whole minute to try to narrow down what specifically we wanted to talk about. But yes, despite her exhaustion at the show, she said yes. And now I'm holding her accountable to that. So
we've suckered her into it.
Sorry, Jessica.
No, I'm happy to be here. And again, thank you both actually for your flexibility too. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming up. I loved how in the back and forth emails that we were doing, you're like, well, I can talk about 17 different things. And I felt like a kid in a candy store. I was like, oh, we could do that. And oh, that would be awesome too. And so
I'm glad you love that. Usually when I tell my wife I have 17 different things on my mind, she's like, okay, slow down. What are you trying to say? So I'm glad somebody appreciates that my mind is there's always something.
When my wife tells me that, I'm like, oh, that sounds exhausting. I only think about one thing at a time, maybe.
ADHD. I mean, I tell you, some people say that like it's a struggle. I really view it as like a superpower. Like, hey, my brain can just dart around.
I have it too, but I get really overwhelmed if there's too much going on. So sometimes I've got to like dump it out, write it down.
Fun fact, that's another thing that I can also talk about. I had to learn different systems or options to kind of be able to focus. Because I do the same thing. Like I will get super overwhelmed, and I've tried all the different systems, whether it's like Zettel custom boards, PKMs for like Obsidian and Notion, writing things down from like a tangible aspect, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's another area that, see, look, there we go. 18 more items. There we go.
That's our next episode on vBrownBag.
Amazing.
How the ADHD brain can survive in 202025.
And the image for that is going to be Zach Galifianakis and all of us like trying to count the mapping.
Yeah.
Before we get too far, Chris, do you have our next slide about the show?
I do. If you are in, I lied. I don't. Oh, fudge. I stink. Never mind.
Oh.
If you are in the live studio audience, if you hashtag vBrownBag on any of the social media platforms, Blue Sky, Twitter, any of the other ones, the unmentionables, we are listening. And give us your questions if you're in the live studio audience. Feel free to pop some questions in the thread, and we will forward them on to our wonderful presenter this evening.
Yep. So on Twitter, you can find us at vBrownBag. On Blue Sky, we are at vBrownBag.com. Sorry, Chris.
No, go ahead.
Oh, and I'm actually watching the Twitter feed. I am tonight's designated survivor who has to suffer through the dumpster fire that is Twitter just to answer your question.
And I'm watching the LinkedIn and Blue Sky feeds.
Yes. Chris, what's your handle? Where can folks find you?
I'm sorry, me?
Yes, sir.
It's right there on the thing. Everybody knows me. I don't have to.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Jessica is far more important. Jessica, how do people find you?
They can find me, JL Deen, no relation to James Dean or Paula Deen, but so 2 E's, DEEN, either on Twitter or if it's Blue Sky, jldeen.dev. Or you can go to jessicadeen.com for my website, but I guess I don't live there, so.
And we will have all of that information in the show notes for the edited version of this as well.
Can I just say one little thing, Chris, that I'm proud of?
No. Sure. Yes.
So I didn't want to do the domain verification with my personal website because it's my full name, first and last name. It's just a lot of characters, right? There is a .dad top level domain.
No. Did you get 6foot.dad?
I did get 6foot.dad, and that's my new Blue Sky handle. I was so proud of that.
Oh,
that's pretty cool.
I'm happy for you.
Yes. I asked my wife. I was like, "Do you want like .dev or .dad?" I was like, "Maybe XXX." She was like, "Nope, .dad. That's it." And I was like, "Man, you have no sense of humor."
6foot.onlyfans? What? No.
Oh no. Family show, Chris.
It's funny. I had the same thought process though, not the XXX, but with the like using full name for Blue
Right.
Sky, because it's too long, especially when you're used to something shorter. So
Right.
yeah, I picked .dev
Absolutely.
because that made more sense. But .dat is cool.
Thank you. I
Agreed.
like it. It made me so happy.
And that's not a country that's going to like re-requisition it like IO is now trying to be repurposed by that little tiny island. Is .dad forever and forever? Hey, Claim's on. Hey, Claim.
Yeah, I think it's just a secure domain for dads. So whatever that means.
Only dads.
Yeah, I mean, this could be something that I regret in 3 years, right? Like,
well, you're 6 foot .dad everywhere. So I mean, 6 foot
Yes.
dad everywhere. So
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
.dad. Let's go for it.
Yep.
Cool.
So we are here tonight to talk about GitHub Actions. Jessica
Finally.
Deen. Yeah. You know, we got to have a little bit of a cold open. So Jessica,
Yes.
what do you have for us?
So I have, well, lots of things. Not 17 though. I do have 5 things because people's attention spans, my own attention span. I mean, gosh. The first thing, so number one, there's a lot of things that people don't know that they could do with GitHub in general, but we're going to focus specifically on GitHub Actions. 5 things that I talk about most commonly is are reusable workflows. And if you don't know what those are, we'll show you a little bit about that today. Job summaries, which are super powerful. One of the things that even shocked me, I've been using job summaries for, I think, since they came out, but even I forget how powerful they are because at the end of the day, and you'll see this in the demo, they're just Markdown. And so at Build last year, we actually were working with Azure AI Studio and the Prompty SDK toolkit to kind of run evaluations on your GPT models or your, I'm not an AI developer advocate, but your models or whatever, you run your Python scripts and your evaluations. When you use prompt flow, you can output that information to a markdown file, which means I could cat the entire results of my evaluations right into a job summary report for GitHub Actions. So anything, whether it's code coverage, whether it's prompt flow results, or I mean, even inputs manually creating, you can output any kind of information that'd be useful for your team to know. So that's job summaries. Matrix jobs are also really powerful when you want to run multiple jobs in parallel, but you don't want to have to write the same job or the same steps multiple times. Artifact attestations, where you can do cryptographic signatures for your binaries or your artifacts that you're building, even SBOM files. And then also OpenID Connect or OIDC. That sometimes really trips a lot of people up because it's frustrating to kind of create that trust relationship between your cloud provider and your CI/CD or GitHub Actions in this case. But if you use Azure, the Azure Developer CLI has actually made that super simple. So those are 5 things we can talk about.
That is amazing. I actually have questions about the job summaries, but I imagine you might cover it. So I'll wait until the end of that section. Yes.
And if I don't, then that will put a little sticky note in my brain to maybe make sure that I incorporate that in the future.
Okay.
Cool. All right. So starting out here, you can see I do have a series of tabs. This is not just because I'm ADHD. This is because I wanted to make sure I was organized for you, the audience. But to start out with reusable workflows, we're going to start out from what I like to call a central repository. And you can think of this just as a place that when you have multiple teams, maybe you have your front end, your back end, your middleware, your authentication, you have all your different parts of your project. If they're going to be doing similar tasks like linting and testing, or even end-to-end deployment or PR deployments where you want to kind of have sandbox things that you're able to replicate the same environment across the different abstracted parts of your application, having a central repository really makes that easy. Not only can you store your workflows, which we'll talk about today, you can also store shared scripts, and you can also store your infrastructure as code. So for example, all of this is deployed on Azure. So we have bicep files stored in here, and we can make sure that we have variables so that we can reuse that again across our different projects. To keep things simple, we're just going to have 2 different teams, our front end and back end. But before I show you those teams, let's drop down into workflows. I have 2 different workflows. We're going to start with our linting and testing workflow. And the magic of how reusable workflows works is really right here on lines 3 through 12. And you can have as many inputs as you want. For the purpose of today, I just picked 2 different inputs for PR repo and PR ref. And on line 4, you'll see this as a workflow call. This means that I'm defining this particular GitHub Actions YAML file that rather than just running on a push to main or on a trigger to pull request, instead, when it's called, pass and allow these inputs, and then that's going to be what fires off this particular workflow. And we'll see how that works. One of the other reasons that I'm passing PR repo and PR ref is because not only can I use this particular reusable workflow on a push to main, but I can also pass the head or the PR branch name and the git commit SHA or the reference to whatever project is calling this particular repo. And I'll show you, we'll take a look at what a caller workflow looks like to be able to pass that information. We're going to skip over the init stage here because we'll talk about that next. But for now, we're just going to look under coverage. And I like to call it coverage because this is just our linting and testing. This is where I'm getting a coverage report of our code prior to pushing it out or deploying it out over into Azure. You can see I start off with checking out the code. And for that, I'm making sure I'm passing in our inputs right here, PR repo and PR ref. And if you do have a private repo, you can also go ahead and pass in a token as well that then you store in the project's repository. I have that commented out at the moment. And then I set up tasks that make sense. So for this project, both the front end and back end, both are going to be using this linting and testing repo for a node project. So we go ahead and set up node 20. We run npm install, npm run lint. And the rest of these steps we'll talk about again a little bit later on today. But that's really the basics of just what the steps and the tasks that we want to run. So when we jump over to our front end repo, we can see that here's a action or workflow that ran or job that ran. We can see our summary, and we have these things that say validate init and validate coverage. Now you saw me kind of jump over init, but then we took a look at coverage. The validate stage is what's happening as part of the workflow or the caller workflow within front end. So if we take a look at the workflow file here, you can see I have a whole bunch of triggers or what's going to go ahead and fire this for push and pull request. I'm also allowing permissions, but this is the job right here. So under validate, that's the prefix, I did set up some conditions that if it's push or conditionally, if it's a pull request and it's not closed, then go ahead and run this. Specifically, line 34, where now I'm referencing that workflow file that we just looked at, that lint and test. And what's cool is I can also version control that or tag it to, I can pin it at main or at a git commit SHA or at a branch if I wanted to test new things out. And then from with is where I'm going ahead and passing the information for PR repo, PR ref. You can see again, I'm doing conditional statements for if it's a pull request, go ahead and take the repo full name. I'm just using built-in GitHub variables, and same thing for ref. Or if it's not a pull request, get the repository and assume that it's going to be named the main branch. You could obviously update that accordingly. Now, what's cool is now I know that the front end is going to be running the same exact steps as the back end. So if I flip over, we now have back end, and we are able, the workflow file looks the exact same. I mean, I could arguably just copy and paste it. I still have that same line 34. I'm passing those variables with, again, the same environment variables and same conditional statements. And even the steps and the summary I get are the same. And as we'll talk about shortly, well, I'll stop talking to see if you have any questions here. But we can also see that we can get the same type of reports. And this is kind of where we're starting to build job summary reports and other valid information. I can now make sure that there's also consistency across my projects. So not only is every project and every team using the same, there's a standardization there, I'm also able to have the same visibility and the same report information published across the different repos without having to, it kind of follows the dry principle, right? I'm not having to like repeat my code multiple times and then maintain 10 different versions of it. Instead, I just have one central version and then the sub-projects call that central version. Cool. So to see, we can jump into the how I'm building the summary. So for example, if we go back over to our infrastructure as code project, and then we kind of scroll up on the init job here. If we take a look at steps, there's 2 different job summaries that I'm building. One, I'm building manually, where I'm building a manual table. I personally like to do this because, especially when you are using this in a production scenario or real world, I like to have that validation of what arguments were actually passed. Did it call the right things correctly? Did it run on the right commit? I just like to have that trust but verify. And then notice right here on line 27, it's outputting to $GitHub_step_summary. That is a built-in GitHub environment variable that allows you to build your job summary, and you can just output any information that you want to be displayed to that particular environment variable. You can also, if this were a PR that we were running, you can also add in steps to create a PR comment. And then if you used a particular action that allowed you to do like a sticky PR comment where you update it or you append it, which this particular job is, it'll also give your users or anyone who's watching that reusable job run, it'll give it an update that this is currently in progress. Check back here for any kind of status updates. But the other thing that I'm doing under coverage is we're also building more of the GitHub report. And this is cool because we're doing this again with conditional statements. So go ahead, and line 73 and 74 is telling GitHub Actions to just add a header, linter results. I want to visually be able to see what the results were. If it's successful, output to GitHub step summary that it passed. If it's a failure, I don't just want to say that it failed. I want to give some sort of at least details or actions or steps that the user or developer, somebody could go do to learn more information. Maybe you didn't run the linter locally before you pushed, just YOLO ship it. Maybe you should run lint locally. We'll see. And then maybe you canceled it. Maybe you pushed it and you realize, oh, I need to change something. So if it's canceled, I also want that information visible. But then in addition to linting, we also have to test our code, right? So we're using Jess to go ahead and run our npm test command. And this is kind of cool because this is one of the things that I mentioned where anything that exists in Markdown. So notice at the top, I was building my own Markdown table, but I don't have to do that. If what I'm using, the tool that I'm using, can output information to Markdown, I can go ahead and save that and cat that. So if we take a look, on line 108, I have an output where I'm calling this report markdown, and I have a custom title for how this is going to show up on the job summary. And then the next step is I'm just catting that particular steps coverage outputs report to job summaries, and that's to GitHub step summary right here. And then I have some post-run cleanup actions. So if we go back and take a look at front end, that's how I'm building this first. This was the manual table. But then if we take a look at the coverage summary, here's our coverage report for Octodemo Nimbus front end on main. If we take a look at this again, this is that custom title where I'm just passing those inputs again. Coverage report for PR repo, PR ref. This is it in action, coverage report for PR repo, PR ref. And then I'm able to get that information, but I didn't have to build this table. I didn't have to add in any of the colors or the test suites or anything else. I didn't even have to worry about the SHA or the coverage report action or anything. This was built from that particular action that could be able to again, output that to Markdown. And then when I flip over to backend, I can see that I get that same information, but I have a little bit of work to do. Whoopsies. But again, I'm able to now have that consistency between front end and between backend. Cool. All right. The next thing we can talk about is matrix jobs. And matrix jobs are really powerful because, again, the whole purpose of a lot of the things I like to show is how we can work smarter, not harder, how we can make sure that we are not having to maintain a whole bunch of code that exists pretty similarly in several different places. So rather than, if I take a look at an older, this is actually one of my own personal projects. If you're familiar with Elgato Keylights, I say this every time I give the session, and like there's like two hands that go up in the room, but I'm sure we are all familiar with Elgato Keylights. strongly disliked the software that you had to use. And when you have a home network set up with VLANs, oftentimes it couldn't find my light. I got really upset with it. So initially started using curl to be able to send a post request to turn my light on and off, change the brightness, change the temperature. And then I ended up writing a lightweight CLI in Rust to handle that. And the best part is it works on Linux, Windows, and Mac, which the last time I had checked the Elgato tool, I think it only worked on Windows and Mac. It didn't work on Linux. All in all, when you're writing anything cross-platform, a lot of times the steps are going to, actually all the time, I feel like the steps are going to be the exact same. So if we take a look at how I used to handle my release for my Keylight CLI, I would have steps for build Linux where I'm checking out, I'm setting up the tool chain, I'm running cargo build, I'm uploading the binary. I have those same steps for Mac OS. I have those same steps for Windows. But if we take a look at how we can leverage, and looking at this, this is, I don't know, down to 89 lines of code where I'm repeating a lot of this. This is unnecessary. If we could actually end up accomplishing this using just a matrix job with one line. So if we take a look at our workflow file, I love this because on jobs, I set up just a build. I don't have to call it Linux, Mac, or Windows. Set up a build. I want to have a strategy that if it fails, fail fast. But specifically, I'm defining that I want a matrix OS. And that's just because this particular application or job is, I want to run it across a matrix of operating systems, Ubuntu latest or runners, Ubuntu latest, Windows latest, Mac OS latest, and then on runs on, rather than saying Ubuntu latest or Mac OS, now I can reference matrix OS. And now I can just have simple steps that make sense for all three of those particular jobs or everything in the array. You can also do this with different languages. So maybe you want to check NPM 14, 16, and 18 and see how the jobs run and make sure that they work across the same. You can set up any matrix that you want. Just for the purpose of this demo, I went ahead and did the like I said, the matrix OS. And what's cool is it's also going to end up running in parallel. So all of these jobs, matrix OS latest, Ubuntu latest, all of those are running at the same time. And you can also leverage this again in a reusable workflow. So then any of your sub projects or teams can then be able to call that and reuse that. I was able, the cool thing is if you're curious about matrix jobs or you want to have a good reference point, GitHub actually has an open source CLI. And this matrix example is from our own CLI repo. So you can go check it out. And this is exactly the way that we set up our own workflows to build the GitHub CLI. And so I copied, this is a cool thing about like anything that's public and open source or whatever, you can go take a look at this workflow file. And that's exactly what I did. I just copied the same steps and rebuilt my own Keylight CLI workflow for a matrix build. And so now I just have build, runs on matrix OS. I define that strategy. And now these are the steps I have. That's 15 lines of code compared to the 89 we looked at earlier. And what's really, it is, and what's really cool is you can kind of let your imagination run wild with what you want to do, because it's not just you're setting up basically a variable that you're calling that references an array. You can also then set up conditional statements with that. Now you'll notice a history. Everything that I've shown pretty much kind of has some sort of conditional statement, because I don't want to have to I want to, like I said, work smarter, not harder. I don't want to have to rewrite the same thing multiple times. So, and I'm sure I could put this all on one line, but for the purpose of demo, sometimes it is a little cleaner to have it just individually. But you can see on rename binary, I'm going to, if the matrix OS that it's running on, if the runner for this step is Ubuntu latest, then name the binary Keylight Linux. If it's Mac OS, name it Keylight Mac OS. If it's Windows latest, name it Keylight.exe for Windows. And each one of these steps will only run or only try to rename that binary if that matrix OS matches.
And those are just standard GitHub runners, those images?
Yes. And if you wanted to, you could also reference your own, like if you had your own runners that you're managing as well, you can put anything you want into that array as long as your repo and your project and your organization has access to it.
Okay.
Yeah. And then now we can talk about we can talk about artifact attestations.
So I actually still had a couple quick
Perfect.
questions about your first presentation, but before I get there, as far as the key light, I agree with you. The Elgato app was terrible. I actually found Home Assistant to be reliable. So
I like Home Assistant too.
Go Home Assistant.
Yes, and that was one of the other things I volunteered that I could talk about because I'm a huge fan about I'm a huge fan of Home Assistant as well. My one issue with that is, and this gets really anal, I am very lazy. Especially during the pandemic, I didn't like the fact that for every meeting I was in or every time I'm on a call or anything where I'm on camera, that I'd have to either have Home Assistant up or go into something to toggle the light on and off. So by having a CLI on my computer and having just a lightweight binary, I actually have an automation script that runs that listens for any time I have a stream open that accesses my camera. I'm on Mac. It automatically will trigger key light on, key light off, which is the binary commands. So I can actually automate. I don't even think about it now. Like I have Stream Decks. I don't have to hit buttons. I don't have to go into Home Assistant. I don't have to do any of that. Anytime my camera turns on, the light turns on. And then anytime I hang up the phone or get off Teams, it works with any program. Anytime I get off whatever camera I'm on, then the light automatically turns off, which is why I didn't do Home Assistant.
That's cooler. I actually wired mine up to Siri, so I can just tell her to turn them on and off. Yes, which makes me feel like I'm living in the future.
And you know what? I love that too. I have a sliding barn door here, and on the wall, it's out of frame, so you can't see. I have it's an overpriced light switch that doesn't look like a light switch. It's a touch screen. It's made by Brilliant, but it has all its different integrations to it, so it can tie into Alexa and other things. And so I have, because even when I close the door, it doesn't actually close out lights. When I used to do a lot of recording where I had to control lights, I have a blackout curtain that will come down in the doorway. And so I program my light switch kind of similar to how you could tell Siri, but I thought it would be cool if I could, like, I don't know, talk to the wall. And I would tell my light switch to open the pod bay doors or close the pod bay doors, and it would lower the curtain and raise the curtain.
That is okay. That's cool as hell.
So, but I'm a huge, like I said, I'm a huge fan of like just figuring out how you can automate things.
And and when it errors out, does it say, "I'm sorry, I can't do that, Hal"?
Sometimes it does. Yeah, I actually, there's a video of it on TikTok. I'm not active really on TikTok anymore. Anyone who may have seen me on TikTok, I'm sorry, I got busy. Maybe I'll do it again. But there's a video of me demonstrating it, and that, like, I think in the video that was one of the questions is like, does it say, "I'm sorry, Hal, I can't do that"? And it does. But that I didn't program. That actually came from Alexa, so I have to give their development team credit where credit's due. Just to jump back to the automating Elgato key light, if anyone was interested in that or curious, I did write a blog post about that and then explained how I developed the solution, the CLI, and then even have this is the bash script that you can run. And then as long as you set it up as a daemon, it'll always run in the background where it's always looking for any time that there's a stream that starts or stops. And then when the camera state changes, then it either turns the key light on or turns the key light off.
That is fantastic.
So you can find that on my blog.
Awesome. Thank you.
I have not checked it with more than one Elgato key light. I know people have, I think, opened issues for where they're volunteering to help. I will get to that. That's my 2025 New Year's resolution. We'll see. So.
Yeah, I've got two, one for right on and the other one for kind of at the side, right? So yeah. Right. Feels a little bit like there are four lights looking into this teleprompter and these friggin' lights blaring at me. Anyways, sorry y'all for the nerdery. So back on the job summaries and the workflow stuff. So for big repos, like if there's, like let's say you wanted to run a test on the VS Code repo, which has a lot of history to it. Does it have to check out the entire history before it runs, or can it just do a detached head, or like limit it to a level 1 checkout or something? How does that work?
So I believe, okay, so that's not a job summary question. That would be a question for how the checkout action works.
Yes, ma'am. So, but yeah, I had grouped those things together because it was in the same presentation.
No, that's fine. I'm guessing I'm just showing so I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but we're going to go find out together. And I'm going to show you one of my favorite ways to go do that is I just use good old Google and we'll go to that actions checkout. For anyone who doesn't know, all an action is just a JavaScript file, and a lot of times when they're not private repos, they're public. So you can go see, like I can see the actions checkout action. I can see the code for it live, and I can even see the main, any of the tags. So for example, v4 would be the main tag right now that is recommended to use. But when we scroll down, it usually tells you what other flags or commands you can use. So I believe, yeah, you can do a sparse checkout. You can give patterns. You can do a fetch depth on it. You can do fetch tags. You can do progress. You can structure that however you want. For the job summary part itself, all job summary is really just that you're outputting that to that variable. And so you can build whatever you want outputted to. But for when you're running your action or your workflow, when you use the action checkout command, you can structure that however you want. You can also choose to download submodules. By default, it won't. You can set a safe directory. Maybe you have a GitHub instance you're trying to clone. This is one of my favorite things to do, especially when they are GitHub owned or partner owned. The documentation is usually top notch.
Yeah, the question I had about job summaries, you answered. I was wondering if it worked like anything written to host or to console would get dumped out to there, and it looks like that is not the case unless you specifically pipe it, right?
Right, you have to explicitly state it. So I don't think I have the example for what I did for build. For build, because I was using Prompty and PromptFlow in the Python file that I had, which was a Python script that was basically just running the same commands that would be in a Jupyter notebook. It was using pandas and data frames. And so I could structure what that table was looking like. And so I created my own little function that would structure exactly the tables that I cared about and nothing else that I didn't. So you get to control exactly what you want to output, whether that's from the markdown that you're exporting just from the tool, like for example, in Jest or whatever, or if you're manually building that, you're in control. For the purpose of the demo, I built this obviously inline. I probably wouldn't do that. I would probably have that be a script that then I call externally. But the same way, if as part of your script, you want to include standard out, standard error, everything, you could choose that as well, and then just output that to the step summary.
That's awesome. I didn't know this. So you promised and you delivered, Jessica.
I do what I can.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite things to talk about because it's so simple, and a lot of people don't know just how powerful it is, and they don't know like the value behind it. But especially when you are thinking more production and big picture, and especially when you have multiple teams or larger projects, when you start to standardize on a set of practices, you want to be able to easily reuse those standardizations across the board. And when you get used to having things like job summaries that make it very easy to see your information rather than having to click down into test annotations, look and see if there were any tests. Okay, that test passed. That's also a boring picture right there because there is no picture. Like now I get it just on the summary. And especially for people that maybe are busy, or maybe have people on the team that they aren't very developer-y, like they're not very good with code. They just want to visually see whether or not it passed. For example, if we take a look at the front end, and let's go to our release and see if we can look at a release workflow. You can see in the release workflow is the other workflow here, which is just a longer version of lint test. So I have more inputs where now I'm setting up where I have multiple, I have backend, I have infra, I have different repos and refs, environments, if I want to support different environments for development, prod, PRs, whatever. And then I also want to have outputs. Now, this is interesting because this is an output for an environment URL. This is helpful where as part of the job summary, I also want to create hyperlinks to be able to, or deep links to be able to go and look at things. For example, in our release for front end, you can see that it initialized the deployment, it built our front end and back end, compiled it, and then did a release over into Azure. But I also, as part of job summaries, have deep links to where I can go view the resources that were deployed in Azure. We'll let that load real quick so I can see this was everything, the resources. So it's a deep link. It automatically logs into my subscription. But then I also can then go see the beautiful app that does literally nothing except allow me to reload and show that I as part of a reusable workflow, was able to connect the two projects together. But you can, like I said, you can put whatever you want in the summary. And this is also helpful because now maybe you have members of your team that they're not developers, but they're more UI, UX, and they want to visually see the changes. Or maybe you're using something like Selenium or Applitools or something like that. You want to be able to visually go see how something looked like. You can add that kind of visual validation to your job summaries as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right.
So we're going to talk about artifacts, right?
Yeah, artifact attestations. So we can take a look at, for example, again, let's see if I can go back to the CLI. If I scroll down, not to the, I'll go back to summary. There we go. Does this one? That one does not. Okay, let's see if I can find it in Actions. We build a lot of the CLI stuff. So let's see. I want to find one. Oh, like we can just go to attestations here. So this is all our attestations for the GitHub CLI. Anytime we have built a binary, it gets published and updated, and I could go download that particular attestation file. And you have a history of it just in your, again, as part of Actions. It's a deep link over onto the left-hand side. When you run a particular action that does the deployment, let's see if I go into deployments here. Anytime you're building the artifact, and I'll show you how easy it is, that under release summary, you'll see the attestation that was created, and then you can see any other information and artifacts that were built. But the way that attestation works is from a simple step. There we go. Fine. And the first thing I do is I make sure that the workflow does have permissions to write attestations. And then if I can't find it here, I'll go find it on. I'm looking for this step. I like showing the GitHub CLI because it's a good reference point to kind of go look at like the de facto how we do it. Mm-hmm. But I have it on my own repo as well, right here. Okay. So this step right here on line 300 to 304, where I'm saying that I want to go ahead and attest the released artifacts only if the environment is production, and then use this GitHub action, where notice that it's pinned to a particular version, but the action itself is actions/attest-build provenance. And then you can say where those particular artifacts are that you published it to. So the subject path here is dist/GitHub wildcard. But that's it. That's the only step you need to do. And then you'll create that cryptographic signature. So what that looks like, I ended up doing the same thing here, where I have attestations created for my Keylight binary. So I have links where as part of the job, and we can go into workflow file that's not 300 lines long. And I scroll down to the release. I'm using the same steps. I just have a different the same step. I just have a different subject path, but I'm clarifying that I want to attest and say, yes, this came from this runner. This is helpful where, like, let's say that I were publishing this to Cargo, or if this were NPM, I'm publishing this to NPM or PyPy or wherever. Anybody who downloads it, if they wanted to go verify that this came from the publisher, this came from me and not somebody else, or the CLI came from GitHub and not somebody else, this signature lives also as part of the GitHub repo. So for example, let me go forward. If I want to verify that, I'm going to go over here. And if I drop down into the Keylight CLI repo, you can see I already pre-downloaded the binary that I built as part of that workflow. Here's the Keylight CLI right here. So if we
can't see that right now.
Oh, let's see. Why can't you?
Are you on a different screen?
I'm on Visual Studio Code. Give me a second.
We see your website. Oh, the browser.
Okay, let's see here. Give me just a second. I didn't get any kind of errors. Privacy. Screen sharing. Let's see. All right. Apologies.
It's okay.
Okay.
Damien, I wonder if Mike Fiedler is in the audience right now.
I don't know.
our pipe PI security guy.
Yeah. So just so I'm understanding this build attestation effectively says through the magic of cryptography that this binary belongs to this build from this repo from Jessica, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It's just linking it. So it's another way from a security perspective to verify that it hasn't been tampered with, that nothing malicious has been injected into it. It's a safe way to make sure that whatever you're downloading and now installing and running on your system isn't going to do anything nefarious, right? Let me make sure that, okay, so.
And that's also making sure that all of your dependencies are being properly managed. And
yes. And I mean, maybe that was the issue. I wasn't sharing the entire screen. So let's share the entire screen. And then now, can you see Visual Studio Code?
Yes.
There we go.
Okay,
yes,
cool.
There we can.
Perfect. Sorry, I had to go check permissions and check a bunch of stuff. So yes, it's just verifying that that package is what it says it is. It's not pretending to be something else. I'm not going to go do Bitcoin mining on somebody's machine or whatever. I'm not like it. Somebody hasn't stolen it and tried to fake it, right?
Yeah.
So in this particular scenario, I already downloaded that binary from my workflow that built it, that I did the attestation on. So when I use the GitHub CLI, I can use GitHub or GH attestation verify. This is not going to work because I'm not in the right directory. So I want to make sure I CD into Keylight CLI. Now when I'm in there, because I can access the Keylight-Linux file, I could do GitHub attestation verify Keylight Linux, and then I give it a repo. And so the repo that built it, the repo that signed it is jldeen/Keylight CLI. And you'll notice it loads the SHA, it calls the GitHub API, and it verifies that the SHAs match.
Okay, that's sick.
Yeah, so, that's very cool.
And then you can tie this also in, because again, it's a CLI, you can tie this also into your workflow files as well, just to verify again that like maybe it's part of your publishing process, that's also another way that you just triple check that nothing, I don't know, nothing has been tampered with, or again, nothing malicious or funny is going on here. So the last thing then we can talk about, and then again, please, if there's any questions, is let's talk about OpenID Connect or OIDC. I kind of already showed you that I deployed the application here, but in order to do that, I needed to make sure that I had a trust relationship between GitHub and between Azure. Now on the front end, I have that set up under secrets and variables. I go to actions, and under repository secrets, I have an AZD, an initial environment config, and under variables, I also have the individual variables that then will connect to my registry and my information. That's all great. But on backend, I don't. So let's go over to our backend. On backend, under repository secrets, I only have a personal access token that I created 3 months ago. Nothing else to be able to kind of link over to Azure. And then under variables, everything under environment and repository variables is also empty as well. Now, if I go over to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to change directories back over into Nimbus backend, clear, and we'll show you in the backend folder, that's just the application that was the backend that literally just says this is the backend on when you go view it. But if you go into I'm a huge fan also of the GitHub Actions extension, because another thing that a lot of people don't know you could do when you're in your different GitHub repos that you have actions and everything set up, not only can you see your environments, but you can also double check your secrets and your variables right from within Visual Studio Code. So if you don't want to have to switch back and forth. So for example, if I refresh here, you can see the same thing we just saw in the web browser. Again, I don't have any repository secrets and I don't have any repository variables. So now I'm going to use one command from the Azure Developer CLI. This is different than the AZ CLI. So the prefix for this is AZD. Pipeline config is the command that then I'm going to do. And if I don't have, maybe I'm new to GitHub Actions. And for those who maybe are brand new to GitHub Actions, it's just a way to automate steps to be able to run tasks that you would do as part of your pipeline or your DevOps process, your continuous integration, your continuous development or deployment process. It's just a way to automate that. If I don't have a workflow file, the Azure Developer CLI will actually help me get started. And there's a whole bunch of templates online where it's a lot more than just OpenID Connect, but that's one of my favorite features. In this case, I already have a workflow, so I'm going to say no. And then after that, it's going to go ahead and take a look at my bicep files, my application. It'll check to see if I already have an application or Entra ID registration in Azure. If I do, it'll update it. If I don't, it'll create it. But then here's what it's also doing. Not only is it creating that app registration and that federated trust relationship, it's also setting up any repo variables and secrets that need to be created on the GitHub side so that the two can be able to deploy my particular application. So now from within VS Code, if I hit refresh here, under repository secrets, I now have my initial environment config as well as all my environment variables. And I can also visually see that over here under variables, it just created that now. And then same thing under secrets where I'll have that init config. And if we then go take a look over in the Azure portal, and we'll zoom in here, these ones already existed. It just updates it every time. But for the purpose of timing, I never like to just wait on Azure. But if we drop down into this and we take a look at our certificates and secrets, you can see it's not a client secret. This isn't like an app ID and app secret that I'm copying and pasting tokens. This is a federated credential that was created by the Azure Developer CLI, where it has been granted access for pull requests and for anything on the main branch. Now, of course, if I had different branches, I'd have to add that credential accordingly. If I were using environments, I would have to update that. But this creates the initial federated credentials. You don't have to worry about thumbprints or anything like that. And if you wanted to add different branches or environments, now you can update that scenario. So for example, I'm adding a credential to this registration for federated credentials scenario. I could choose GitHub Actions. The issuer is already in there. I would choose my organization, my repo, and then under entity, I could choose whether I wanted to add a new branch, a tag, environment, and then it would fill in the subject identifier from there. So it's one command and it builds all of this for you.
Yeah, that's so cool.
That was one of my favorite. I had left Microsoft for a while and then I went somewhere else. And then when I came back to GitHub, this was one of the first things I saw when I came back. And it blew my mind because I can't tell you how many like create secret scripts I had that would like build my different RBAC roles and everything for contributor and owner and like just to be able to do all my deployments. And number one, I have to manage that. Number two, it's not secure. Friends don't let friends do that. I just was lazy, as I've said earlier. But then this is just so much easier. Like the fact I could do it with one command was just awesome.
Yeah.
This is a huge time save.
Yeah. And then the fact that I can go and update it. I mean, I have complete control. It's technically a short-lived registration, but I can go and assign it like to an owner. I can add it as part of the team. So other people also have access to it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Any other questions? I know that's a lot. That's a lot in a short time frame. So
it's quite all right. You know how comedians have like a tight 5? This was a tight 50, right? It's like 50 minutes, boom, done. Even with banter, you are on it. So
well, and this was actually the longest presentation I've ever given for it because normally I have to keep it very constrained. Like the times that I've given this is 20, 25 minutes. Like, and like they will Betty will beat me or like, what was that? Like they'll pull me off the stage with the little like
the stage hook.
The stage hook. Yeah. So, I mean, I can't normally go into it. But I mean, I love GitHub Actions. I love all things DevOps. I think that this is super cool. One other thing that has nothing to do with GitHub Actions, but I figured I'd mention it because to describe GitHub Actions and reusable workflows before, sometimes it's hard to kind of visualize like the front end, the back end, and the infrastructure as code. So I've drawn it out, but I'm a terrible artist. But since we kind of nerded out about other stuff, if you've never heard of the tool Excalidraw, you should check it out. It's awesome because I've used this before to kind of like add in like, okay, here's our little reusable workflow. And here's our little, like if I grab a circle, here's our team 1, and then here's our team 2. And then you can easily draw arrows. And And what's cool is you can also run Excalidraw in a container. So like this is my own private version of Excalidraw, and it's free and open source. Or you can go and also run it just by going to excalidraw.com. Not sponsored, don't even know who created it. I just found it a while ago, and it's also one of my favorite things to kind of talk about and show at the very end, and I figured I'd throw that in there.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I didn't know about it, and I remember I was documenting maybe a process for vBrownBag, and just finding a place where you can have like flowchart symbols that's free and exportable was difficult, you know?
Well, and you can have a library too. So like you can go
Yeah.
and browse libraries, and there's like a whole bunch of like where people have shared other icons, which is
cool.
really cool. So I use that for, there's a video out there about GitHub Actions and reusable workflows in the first 50 seconds or so, or like it's very much Adobe, what is it? Adobe After Effects with Excalidraw images, but it's moving around, kind of demonstrating again reusable workflows, and I used Excalidraw to create it. So
I love it. Well, thank you. I have learned a lot. This has been a very informative hour for me. Thank you.
Happy to help.
I have as well. For the members of our audience who are just now trying to get into GitHub Actions, do you have any recommendations for like the beginner and intermediate level folks that are trying to, hey, tell me more about GitHub Actions?
Yeah. So one of the easiest ways, like if you wanted to go check it out, is you could definitely go get started from github.com features actions. You can also check out our docs, because it will kind of walk you through things. Or like I said, if you need help getting started with like a workflow file, we have, what is it? The Azure Developer CLI templates. I forget what they call it. It's the templates gallery. I know we also have Microsoft Learn content as well, but as part of the templates, wherever they are, let's see, awesome AZD. So the template library here, you can go kind of look for maybe projects that are similar to yours. And as part of these kinds of projects, it will also give you GitHub Actions workflows with it. And so one of the best ways that I like to learn is I like to go see how other people are doing it. That's why I also exactly. And that's why I pointed out using our CLI itself, because if you take a look at any project that GitHub owns, or even favorite projects of yours on GitHub, you'll be able to see the Actions workflows. They're all public as long as it's a public repo. For those who don't know, GitHub Actions workflows are found in the .github folder, and then the workflows folder. And then under there, you can view and see how other people, maybe how they handle their lint. And so you can see, okay, well, it's named lint on, what is going to turn it on, right? And then from there, you're going to just start defining your jobs or your steps. One of the things I've used a lot of CI/CD platforms before, and to me, GitHub Actions was the one that just, for my brain, made the most sense, because it was so logical and so linear. But to answer your question, like where they can go to get started, I would say to go find your favorite project that you're interested in, see if how they're doing it. Take a look at templates that we have, and take a look at our GitHub docs as well. And then you can also explore the Actions marketplace too, because maybe there's a step that you want to replicate because there's a tool or something that you're using. We have a ton of partners that also create actions as well. As soon as this loads. Come on.
And if memory serves, and if this is incorrect information, I apologize, but isn't Actions like free for public repos, and private ones has some sort of limits to it?
I'm really bad at the pricing. I always go and verify.
I know you're not a salesperson.
I am not a salesperson. GitHub Actions pricing. Let's go double check. So if you're curious about billing, yeah. So GitHub free gives you 500 megabytes of storage. That would be for artifacts. And then you get 2,000 build minutes per month. And then if you are a GitHub Pro subscriber, or if you're part of organizations, team, enterprise, there's different storage limits and different minutes that you get for free. You can also always provide a credit card, because cash is king, and then pay for whatever minutes and time that you need as well.
Those questions are on the GitHub Foundations exam.
Yes. And I don't think GitHub free existed when I took my Foundations exam.
I don't think I'm eligible to take it. I don't know if I am, but who knows?
It was a remarkably difficult exam. It really hit it out of the park for a Foundations. So I was like, Oh man, I'm not going to pass this.
Did you not read my article, Damien?
I did, but I've got a short memory sometimes. I think it's the ADD.
Amazing.
Yes,
right.
yes.
And we will put all of these links into the show notes, including the Excalidraw open source documentation as well. That's a great tip. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, of course. And then I was trying to see, anytime that I get stuck, like I said, I'll either go look at the action repo if I'm curious as to how to use it, or if I'm stuck for like how to, like when I'm writing a workflow file, the number one place I go is to our GitHub docs. So like if we search in here, I'm just curious, actions. Yeah, so I mean, there's tons. GitHub Actions, share automations, create actions, how to do repository settings and actions, REST API. There's all sorts of things you can do. But I would say to go check out docs. I'll make sure that for the final edited one, I'll try to give you some links with a little bit more succinctness. But in the meantime, I would just say to go search for the GitHub Actions docs.
Amazing.
Cool.
Sweet.
So folks can find you where? You said...
And here we go. Actually, I just found it. This is how ADD I am. I'm like, oh, let me go search, but it's literally right here. So
okay, that's fine.
Great. Yeah, and so actually, there's a whole bunch of documentation for writing workflows, use case examples, syntax, etc. All right, and then people can find me.
Yes,
it's JLDeen, JLDEEN. So I can go to this or Blue Sky, and then you can go find me there.
Cool. Well, thank you.
That hair is amazing. Yeah. You have that hair everywhere, don't you?
Sometimes it doesn't always look amazing. Sometimes I'll put a hat on, but yeah. All right.
Next, when we meet in public, I'm actually do that with my beard. I'm going to have it swoosh to the right, just so.
Oh, cool.
I'm trying to think if I know people who've done that. I don't, but I know people who will like swoop it, like they'll make it in, like it kind of like it's almost like a tunnel in, like it's.
Oh, yeah.
I
can't. Mine can't do that. I get bed beard. It just goes bananas.
All right, we are at the top of our hour.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts?
No, I mean, if anyone has any questions or comments or anything, I mean, feel free to find me. If I don't reply right away, give me a little bit. I'm sorry, but I'll try to.
You have 17 other things going on. All these projects.
I also have a bad habit.
Too.
Yeah, I also have a bad habit though, where I'll open up a message and I'll look at it and be like, "Oh, I have to respond," and then squirrel shiny, and then yeah. So, but I will. Yep. I will respond.
Same.
Cool.
Same.
All right. Yeah, and
Jessica,
thank you again
so
very
much
much,
for
Damien.
coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.